Now that we have examined Spandrel's thesis on bioleninism in the previous two videos, we can ask ourselves what exactly has evolved from the breeding pools of 20th century ideologies. As Spandrel said, liberalism is incapable of producing a cohesive ruling class that can sustain the liberal regime. The result is that every liberal regime that once existed in the West has been displaced by something else. This process began early on in the life cycle of liberalism. We will start our analysis at the French Revolution, which has been described as, quote, the greatest catastrophe ever to have befallen mankind, end quote, from A Handbook for Traditional Living, page 26. While the English Civil War and American Revolution certainly foreshadowed the violence liberalism was capable of producing, the French Revolution was truly where liberalism evolved from the idea of fairness in government and freedom in economics to a more radical set of ideas that were the seeds of the ultimate destruction of liberalism, and those are liberté, égalité, fraternité. This set of ideas forms an interesting synthesis of concepts both left and right. If we recall a previous video I made on another concept of Spandrel's, the neo-reactionary trichotomy, we can use that analysis to classify these concepts both in their older forms and modern incarnations, to better understand how they manifest themselves in the regimes subsequent to the French Revolution. The first, liberté, characterizes the nobility, in modern terms the managerial class, and on the modern right in particular, those who have libertarian economic preferences. These groups throughout time have shared a common interest in liberty because, as Spandrel recognized in bioleninism, these people are of the type whose natural abilities will allow them to rise maximally in society when given the opportunity to express their full potential. The second, égalité, characterizes the clergy, and still does, at least among right-wing Christians, but as we know from studying the trichotomy and neo-reaction in general, the major expression of égalité in modernity is on the left, in the form of a post-Christian, post-Marxist-Leninist radical egalitarianism. Essentially, the essence of this idea is the notion that humans are fundamentally equal, and equally deserving of the same material benefits as all others. We will examine this idea in other contexts later on, as it is the keystone of this entire process. The third, fraternité, characterizes the commoners, in modern terms the working class, and on the modern right in particular, nationalists. On the left as well, this idea has persisted in the form of class solidarity, rather than ethnic solidarity, in the older Marxian form of economic class. And in modern or bioleninist terms, whatever groups are the most underperforming and therefore benefit the most by presenting a united front. This combines with the previous form of egalitarianism to produce a virile combination that unites these groups into a general movement via a unified coalition that combines different group interests while also asserting that all of these interests are equal. This combination is very much at odds with liberté, examples of which should be easy to imagine, and I leave it to the viewer to iterate them. But enough on this categorization for now. It's best not to dwell on these things too much, as this taxonomy exists simply as a tool to help us contextualize these ideas throughout history, rather than to provide hard and fast rules. So now we can go back to our analysis of liberalism and bioleninism. As I stated, it is the radical egalitarian notion that is the real underpinning of Cthulhu swimming left. Liberty and fraternity, in terms of allowing the people of a nation to express their individual character in an organic and harmonious fashion, are perfectly natural and good phenomena. But egalitarianism, once it escapes the bounds of a Christian description of the soul before God, quickly begins disintegrating and corrupting these previous two ideas, often in tandem with one or the other. In the post-French Revolutionary world, we see this idea at work in the American Civil War, for example. The use of slave labor, of course, is a black mark on any civilization, and while the notion of liberating slaves is noble in spirit, if not an execution in the United States, the Civil War resulted in far more than the mere liberation of slaves, but rather the beginning of the full integration of the slaves into the society as equal members. As we covered from Guénon, the Great War, the capstone of the lifespan of the Ancien Regime, expressed egalitarianism in the use of the mass man as a unit of warfare. It is really at this point that the individual as a unit of quantity fully came into being, and became the dominant form over the person of unique quality and character. By the end of the Great War, Western nations favored a system of managed society in which the government proactively shaped society via managing these individual units, rather than having an organic civilization with a freely expressed personality. It is at this point in history that we can say with certainty that anything one might have recognized as liberal regimes in the classical sense were overcome by successor ideologies. In the United States, progressivism. In Britain, the influence of socialism through labor. In Russia, a complete and radical shift from a monarchy to communist autocracy. In Italy, the rise of fascism. And in Germany, a floundering republic that culminated in National Socialism. The United States, Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union in particular attempted massive public works projects with varying degrees of success. For the most part, these measures had little impact on actually solving the economic problems of the interwar years. But beyond specific programs, the deep shared heritage of all these political systems came from the intellectual basis for the French Revolution, what Friedrich Hayek referred to as, quote, continental liberalism, end quote. It might seem strange to use the term liberalism when describing Russia, Germany, and Italy in the 1930s, but of course we are not talking about English liberalism. The continental liberalism of revolutionary France had woven its way into the new ideologies of the 20th century, expressing itself in dramatically different ways that set the nations on a collision course, but at core they had the same basis for their ideologies. In the Soviet Union, the expression is most obvious to even the novice observer, especially before the policy of socialism in one country was implemented. International communism envisioned a complete leveling of the world, such that every human being on the planet would be reduced to the same level of prosperity, a scenario which can fairly be described as the ultimate realization of the egalitarian principle. Socialism, of course, is not simply a Russian phenomenon that spread to Western Europe, but, like egalitarianism itself, was significantly developed in France, including by Lenin himself, while he lived in Paris. As mentioned prior, this is also one of the cases where the idea of fraternité was used as a vector for egalitarian subversion, specifically through the working class as an international brotherhood. After Stalin took power, this policy remained within the Soviet Union in its implementation, and its chief rivals implemented egalitarian policies of their own, less extreme than the Russian form, but with their own egalitarian strains nonetheless. It might also seem strange to regard National Socialism as egalitarian in any way, but of course, when one looks at it from a perspective in which one suspends the historical haze of our understanding of World War II, and focuses on the specifics of what it hoped to achieve within Germany, we can understand that Hitler wanted all Germans to have an equal opportunity to participate in their shared great destiny, based on their abilities in a socio-Darwinistic manner, regardless of their class background, and to build up a prosperous culture that was capable of ensuring that every German had a minimum level of existence secured. This was essentially similar to something the United States and all of the major European powers were trying to achieve in the 20th century. It is unsurprising that the economic policies of these ideologically opposed nations were so similar. Their disagreements were not on the fundamental goal of egalitarianism, but rather who it was for and by what means. This sort of egalitarian attitude may seem good from the perspective of those on the right who are nationalist-minded and seek to care for the nation through a centrally managed economy. But of course, as happened in the United States, where power accumulated to those who were able to reap the most profits, so too did this happen in Germany. Power went to those who were able to cut the best deals for the Führer. This conception in both cases undermines the hierarchical structure of a traditional aristocracy, which was founded on much more than simply the ability to effectively organize economic units, but on a more holistic conception of aristocratic achievement. We need not dwell much further on the expression of egalitarianism in Italy, France, Britain, and the United States, as they should be fairly obvious, but I will mention Italy, as people may be less familiar with the developments in this smaller power. Fascist Italy embarked on public works projects similar to those of the Roosevelt administration, specifically projects like Arthurdale and the Tennessee Valley Authority. In the United States, the Arthurdale settlement was one of many intended centrally planned mixed agrarian industrial settlements that represented the ideal basic conditions under which the Roosevelt administration believed Americans should be living. The Tennessee Valley Authority is a much larger project that dwarfs anything attempted in fascist Italy, but is characteristically the same, and focused on monumental projects such as dams. In Italy, Mussolini, during the Great Depression, took up arms against the Agropontino, a formerly productive farming region that had been lost to marshes. In the battle for this land, Mussolini, like Roosevelt, had a vision of the circumstances under which his people should be living, and he implemented it with no less vigor. The passage of the Bonifica Integrale land improvement law encompassed a complete reworking of Italian civilization into a more agriculturally based society. A network of farms and urban centers was constructed, and defined not only where but how Italians were to live. For Italy, this mode of living had a fraternité to it, and also an égalité, in that every member of the nation would be equally in service to the state, as the embodiment of the nation. The ends of the state embodied liberté, in the idea that an individual could only experience the richness of their personhood in the context created by the state. One could not truly be free to self-actualize outside of the collective will embodied in the state. In the case of Italy, egalitarianism was not as strongly expressed as in some forms of these other regimes. Italy, perhaps properly moderated, could have functioned well enough on these ideas if it had accepted its status as a modest state, but the excesses of the French Revolution revealed themselves in Italy's overzealous implementation of its ideals and its self-destructive imperialism. In viewing these regimes in a left-right framework and the Bioleninism framework, we can note that each moved only as far leftward as necessary to achieve totalitarian control. The Soviet Union was the most left-wing regime, but even Russia's politics only went as far left as necessary, thoroughly worn down by its defeat in the Great War, with an army radicalized with socialist ideas. In Russia there existed the conditions for a Russian Revolution much like the French Revolution. Even in this case, however, Russia, after Lenin, chose the more nationalist or more right-wing path. Stalin was to the right of Trotsky, preferring a more nationalist version of communism, as opposed to international communism. Trotskyism was unnecessary in Russia for holding total power, and thus the Stalinist regime was victorious. In Germany, Hitler synthesized socialism and nationalism, creating something to the right of socialism, but to the left of the conservatives, who in Germany were very traditionally minded, in favor of monarchy and nationalism, and vehemently against socialism, even in the form of National Socialism. But of course, their way of thinking was not sufficient to achieve power in democratic Germany. So it took something further to the left, something that could offer a raising of status to more people to achieve power. Italy likewise had no overriding desire for anarchic socialism, and apparently preferred a more ordered and nationalist model like Germany. Following World War II, all of this was swallowed up in the victory of the United States and the Soviet Union over the rest of the world. The Soviet Union at this point had calcified into a totalitarian state which only paid lip service to its ideological roots. In this case, we can view Russia not as the end state of liberalism, but as one possible end state. France, of course, had also experienced such an end state once before, in the Bonapartist regime following the French Revolution, but it destroyed itself, much like fascist Italy, with its excessive militarism. In post-war Europe, France found itself tied to the United States. The United States, a major victor in both world wars, had no desire to transition to a totalitarian regime with expediency. Britain and France, likewise, were battered down, but in better condition than the countries to the east, and in these places continental liberalism continued its slow burn. Today, the United States and Western Europe make up the Blue Empire, which, as we learned about from Bioleninism, is in the same process of calcification towards totalitarianism as in the Soviet Union, but isn't quite there yet. The Blue Empire, for the uninitiated, is a reference to the Moldbugian conception of America as progressive conquerors of Europe and Japan in World War II. Europe was not so much liberated by America as it was conquered by it, and it faithfully executes to this day the progressive political system installed in it by FDR, as a wing of the greater American empire. This empire is very powerful in the world, but very weak in its internal constitution. Its expression of the egalitarian principle in a universal democratic form leaves it open to exploitation by low-status people in order to accumulate power to themselves in a way that many of the other mentioned regimes were not. This has evolved into what we call globo homo, the use of America's influence to peddle all men are created equal in every country, which results in what we call liberal democracy. Conceptualizing this force in purely American terms is somewhat archaic, so instead of American Empire or Blue Empire, we will simply refer to internationalism. The globo homo of internationalism is not simply a generic homogenization, but homogenization into a specific system that will cause low-status people everywhere to be elevated and venerated. These people, of course, prefer authoritarian states and command economies that prevent people who are independently capable from achieving anything that would legitimately threaten the internationalist system. The elites, of course, prefer this as well, as they cannot tolerate any competition. There is, of course, still a hierarchy of elites in any system, and some degree of freedom as well, and the way these are managed differs depending on the regime. The communist regime is proactive. The state enacts a master plan in every domain of human activity in a truly totalitarian manner. Communism maintained a high degree of bureaucratic controls from its inception, with excessive micromanagement at every level of human activity. The fascist regime is reactive. It uses state power to compel certain activities when a problem arises. National Socialism and Fascism acted in a more ad hoc manner than the Soviet Union, using a corporative model that synthesized private and public interests into national interests, rather than attempting to subsume everything, although they certainly subsumed quite a bit in the end. The internationalist regime is preemptive. It establishes a power base that tracks with its evolution towards totalitarianism. It is similar to fascism, except that in place of coercion, it incentivizes conformity, using a Gramscian methodology to breed loyal consumers of product, avoiding the need to use hard force on most problems. This is quite insidious because what it is essentially doing is breeding people for compliance so that they will never muster any resistance in the first place. Why would they, as the totalitarian state is liberating from the perspective of the low-status person? The elites have learned very well from failed 20th century regimes that it is better to build a coalition of willing followers than to build a coalition of ideological purity by force. It is important to realize that the elites of international liberal democracy are not losers like many of the people who follow them. They are extremely competent in what they are doing. One of the problems with trying to deal with the effects of continental liberalism has been a failure to make a fundamental break with the ideals of the French Revolution. Part of this problem is an accelerating obsession with ideology minting as a solution. Especially in the 21st century, political dissidents rapidly assemble a la carte ideologies made from pieces or reinterpretations of reactionary movements, as if merely finding the right combination of these ideas will break the lock of internationalism. These ideas tend to be highly personified, having a name and a face. This is in line with the deeply personalized nature of modern society, compared to older traditions. One of the problems with this sort of thinking is that one cannot simply resurrect any of these ideas in the modern context. The internationalist regime has done an extremely effective job at reshaping Western civilization into a hive of consumers. There is an idea that there is a latent spirit of Western man waiting to burst forth if it can only be freed from the prison of globo homo, but we have to contend with the possibility that this is simply not the case, and that Western man has been ground down into a different form, and will have to be entirely reshaped before even being in the condition under which any semblance of an organic society can reemerge. The internationalists have spent the last 75 years, at least, reshaping Western man to be compatible with the liberal democracies of today. A person from 1945 would not be compatible with the society of 2020. Likewise, a person of 2020 would not be compatible with the types of society that reactionaries want to construct. Even for the libertarians, an organic free market wouldn't be compatible with the type of person we have now. If the economy was magically reoriented at the snap of a finger, it would likely quickly revert to exactly what we have now. Likewise, some idealize the fascist form as a solution to globo homo, which confronts basically the same problem. The basic conception of fascism is that it is a system of government in which the spirit of a people is carried on into the future, as embodied in the state. But the spirits of our people have been virtually annihilated, and if we wanted to construct a state to safeguard their spirit, it would basically look exactly like what we have now. In America, if the government became a fascist government, it would embody the spirit of consumerism, and would not be substantially different from what we have now, other than exhibiting a more compulsive enforcement of the current zeitgeist. Therefore, fascism in of itself, as a system of governance, cannot be the solution. The older form of the European spirit now only exists in a vanguard that a select few occupy, in a men among the ruins fashion. This is a heavy black pill to take, but we just have to realize the reality that the base form of modern Westerners is simply the cosmopolitan bugman. People aren't being deceived into rejecting their true spirit. The true spirit of the majority really is the Bugman for most, and if we could simply wish away the internationalist order, they would reconstruct it almost immediately. Many people may be beyond rescue. The idea that every person can be transmuted from their current form into a restored form is an egalitarian notion itself. A staple of the right is a rejection of egalitarianism, and therefore we must embrace this recognition. Those who cannot be transformed must be stepped over, and many new people will have to be conditioned for a restoration before there is even enough will to achieve it. The overriding point in this video is that none of the ideologies we have reviewed here represent a fundamental break from the continental liberalism that has gotten us here in the first place. The real problem we face is that both left and right have spent the last century at least trying to figure out how to best implement the ideals of the French Revolution, when we really need to step over all of this into older forms. Much of the disagreement seems to have revolved around how to organize the economy. Both left and right have defined themselves in large part by their economic policies. But this is only one piece of the puzzle. Economics should not distract from the greater crisis of values. Values, of course, affect economics, and economics can affect values. But the prime mover in this equation is the idea that humans deserve to live in certain conditions of liberty and equality, and that they are owed this, even when they haven't earned it, through meeting their own duties and obligations. This is the problem we are facing, and we must avoid falling into the Kafka trap of the current truth regime's false dichotomies, and think far outside of this box towards a unification of the right into something that holistically and discursively addresses this great nemesis of continental liberalism. Thanks for watching.